All right, so you're looking to take on 16 fear, maybe 32 fear, maybe it's something else. I think the advice for all fears is going to be pretty similar. There's a lot of overlap, so I wanted to go over it mainly with a focus on 16 and 32, but I think all of this advice is going to be good for anyone who's looking to just bump up the fears from whatever they're currently running. This right here is the setup that I've got as a good baseline, I'll say, for 16 fear. So I want to talk about these choices and where you've got some flexibility in moving stuff around. So going through here, we've got in each encounter, you're taking 100% bonus damage the first time you're struck. It's going to end up giving you 2 fear, which is a big reason why I like it. It can be a little bit tough. You can take some big hits, but the biggest reason here is that in boss fights, it's not going to be too punishing. Whereas if you were to do something like bump this up 1 or 2 ranks, you're going to be taking constant damage from, let's say, Kronos or Eris, which is much, much more punishing, I think, for most players. I think most players, myself included, find it a lot easier to get through just the general encounters and rooms, which makes this not too bad. It's not going to proc too many times. This Vow of Haunting, so when you kill enemies in regular rooms, they have a chance of spawning this little green orb that you've got to run and pick up. Otherwise, the enemy's going to respawn. Really, it's not going to proc all that often. In terms of actually respawning, it's not that difficult to get to, and even if something does respawn, it's generally pretty easy to go back and kill it. The big thing here is that it's going to increase the amount of time that it takes to go through your whole run. So if you're running 9 minutes, 7 minutes per biome, it's going to be a little bit more difficult if you've got to run around and pick up these little globes. So I think of this one as more of just a time sink than anything. Valve Wandering, this one I think is probably the easiest. Sometimes you're going to get foes from the next region show up. That really doesn't tend to be that scary. There's a few exceptions where something will appear. I'm a little bummed that it appears because it's got a ton of health, but again, it's mostly just a bit of a time sink. Most stuff isn't that scary, not too bad. I've got a little bit here on Valve Scars, so your healing is half as effective. This is one of the ones I think you can be pretty flexible on. You could do that, or you could go towards damage. It's kind of similar. I'll talk a little bit more about flexibility later, but this one's sort of on the bubble, pretty self-explanatory. Money, I think, is very, very straightforward. If you're doing most of your runs, you'll find that you have enough money for anything that you want at shops. So even bumping it up by 80%, it really doesn't feel too bad. I'd actually say, in comparison to Hades 1, I have a lot fewer money struggles in this game. So this one, which was a pretty easy pick in the first one, is an even more obvious choice than this one. Here to Vow of Forsaking. So after you choose a boon, 2 unpicked blessings won't appear that night. So basically, if you're given 3 options in your list for boons, you end up taking the first one. Well, the other 2 just will never show up again. And for the most part, it's actually not that bad. There's some times where you really want to couple certain things. Let's say you're going, I don't know, Zeus, and you take the attack while there's still the cast available or something like that. Well, now you can't get the attack and the cast. You'll have to look for the cast somewhere else. But there's actually times where this can be beneficial. A great example is something like Hera. If you go for Born Gain, which I think is the obvious choice for what a lot of people are going to be looking for, you grab Born Gain, and then maybe the special and, I don't know, the sprint are going to disappear, but that's going to increase your odds of getting, say, the attack, and the attack is going to be a pretty high percentage modifier. So on the one hand, it could be something that you're targeting. It could also just mean more predictability in the other boons that you're going to be offered, so when you go back there, you've got a better idea of what's actually going to show up. So this one, yeah, it's really not too bad to take. It doesn't really feel punishing, and sometimes with those benefits, yeah, actually worth it. Valve Bitterness, I really don't recommend. But Valve Desperation, I think this is another one that's kind of on the bubble. Some people here are going to going to like it. They're going to feel comfortable with it. I think if you played Hades 1 and you're familiar with those time limits, there's nothing to really be nervous about. You'll get used to 9 minutes, 7 minutes, 5 minutes, very much in the same way as before. I've been getting some of my runs down to 5 minutes now, and it doesn't feel too bad. But for some people, and I know when I first started taking on the heat system in Hades 1, felt very, very hard to get used to. So for some people, you're just going to want to drop that down to 0. I do think 9 is really not too bad. I'd say even if you feel uncomfortable, you're nervous, give it a go at 9 and just see how that feels. But it is going to force you to change your playstyle a bit. Some people just hate that. They want to turtle. They want to sit back. They don't want to feel rushed during the run, and I think that's just fine. You could go ahead and drop that. In which case, I would probably opt for something like Vow of Fury. Vow of Fury doesn't feel too bad in this game, with enemies being faster for the most part. There's a couple bosses where I find it very noticeable. Eris and Kronos are the two major ones. I can run through those boss fights pretty much no problem here. Now I think I've got the hang of it. Everything's good. If I jack this all the way up to 40%, I really feel it. Stuff like the Kronos one-shot, that's going to proc a lot faster. Some of his attacks are just crazy. And then the fact that time is all distorted and messed up in that fight can make this really difficult. But at 20, it's not too bad. You feel the jump, but all in all, I think it's very manageable. And if you're going with no time, that means you can play really safe, leading all the way up to those boss fights, to Eris, to Kronos, and then you're in good shape to actually go ahead and take those on. Yeah, if you don't really like this, I did, again, mention Vow of Scars, I think kind of on the bubble. Much in the same way, I think you could drop that. For Vow of Fury, it would allow you to drop 1 point somewhere else. I also think you've got some flexibility between these. You know, maybe you could drop that and have the first level here. That would be okay to be taking more damage because you've got more heals, things like that. It can be weapon dependent, build dependent, you know, whatever you're going for on the run, a little bit different. I do like it kind of the way that I had it set up at first, like this. If you're comfortable with time in general, I think this kind of ends up being a freebie a lot of times as you get better and better with time. Something like this doesn't feel too punishing, but yeah, don't feel tied to this for every single thing. This is sort of a good spot to begin. But as we make our way up to 32, I think a lot of these have to go in. I think a lot of times you're having to drop your healing down to 0. I do recommend most of the time pushing for 5 minutes. Again, some people really hate it. You can go back to 7. You can add some more enemies in. That's fine. But there's a couple others here. So we've got the Onion, we've got Vow of Arrogance, which is going to actually end up priming a lot of your magic for any boon that you take that has increased rarity. And you've got this Vow of Panic. You see we're at like 35 here. There's a lot to play with. And a lot of it, for me, stems around this Vow of Bitterness in particular. So let's talk about this case, this setup where we've got 32 fear. In this case, when you're not taking the Onion, this feels okay because you can take a god boon to start things off. You can pick, let's say, Hera. Hera is a great choice. You're going for Born Gain. You snatch up Born Gain on your first pick. That first area, that first region, it's going to be tough. You're going to have no healing. You got to make sure that you don't die. But if you can make it all the way through, you can equip, and we'll take a look at Keepsakes after, but you can equip the engraved pin. The pin will let you die and sort of re-heal, and it'll make up for this lack of healing. And you're good. You've got the setup that you want. If you've got Born Gain, you don't really mind having your magic primed. You don't mind starting a location with 0%. That's totally fine. However, not every build is going to want to go for Born Gain. Some of them are very dependent on magic. They're very dependent on starting with magic, and you don't always want to equip Born Again right off the bat, or sorry, a God Keepsake right off the bat to target something like Born Again. I would say if you're going through the underworld, it's a lot easier to actually do that. Things start slow. You're not going to be taking a lot of damage. It's pretty easy to make it through there without the pin. But if you go to the surface, you've got a lot harder rooms to clear. Getting through the surface to the first boss and actually through that without dying, much, much, much harder. So you kind of want the pin. And if you've got the pin equipped, then you're not going to be going for your first chosen God Keepsake, which means you can take the onion. And by the way, in case you were wondering, using the God Keepsake with this on, it will show you the God that you want and then turn it into an onion. So it's kind of just useless, and it negates it overall. So if you do something like that, then you can actually go ahead and drop this. Maybe even drop this. I think you still keep it a bit higher. But you could do something like drop the amount of damage you're taking. Maybe if you don't like, the time limit as much, you could do something like that. Put it in this case. But it's going to be very much, weapon dependent. What are you going for? Just identify that off the bat. Do I need mana? And do I need that initial God Keepsake? If not, I think it's okay to go Bitterness. But if you do, you do end up needing it, then you've got to drop Bitterness. And I think that other setup is kind of how you do it. So why not some of these other choices? Why am I not bumping this up? Why am I not, bumping up Vow of Dominance, these kinds of things? Well, Vow of Suffering, the reason why I don't like it is if we go back to the pin case, the pin is going to revive you with 60 HP. If you come back with 60 HP and you take a bonus 300% damage on the first hit in an area, especially if you've got anything on this Vow of Blood, it could be enough to just outright kill you. And it's going to set the pin off again right at the start. You're not going to be able to clear the area in 10 seconds. You're not going to come back with 60 HP. You're going to lose a Death Defiance, which is a big no-no for me. So I would actually rather bump this up to 60%. It's rough on bosses. You're going to be taking a lot of damage. You're going to have to know the boss fights pretty well. But overall, you're going to get better usage out of the pin. It's going to be easier to make it through those other areas as you go. Vow of Dominance, enemies having extra HP. This is really just a matter of time. So you're going to have to weigh this against your time limit. If you're going for 5 minutes, it's going to be very, very, very tight. Let's say you're going to bump, the damage down. Okay, this is fine. But if you've got 5 minutes, this extra health, especially on bosses, even if you feel very comfortable beating Cerberus or pretty comfortable in the Chronos fight, another 20% on all the enemies is going to take some time, but especially you got to remember on the bosses, going to take a lot more time as well. This is a similar sort of thing. It's going to take more time, but not only does it take more time, foes not being able to take damage on 1 or 2 instances, you're going to have to remember it makes them not stagger as well. So even if they don't have armor, but they've got this little health bubble thing on, they're not going to stagger. It's going to be very difficult to get through those areas. It eats up a lot of time. Really, really difficult. And same thing here with more foes per encounter. It's another thing that's going to eat up a lot of time. But even worse than that, it's not just that the enemies come sort of all at once. You'll see there's like more waves of enemies spawning, I guess you would say. And because there's more waves, it takes time for those to spawn. You've got to, finish the current wave to introduce the new wave. It competes really, really strong with this. So if you are someone who really hates this, you want to go down to like 9 minutes, or let's say you want to try 32, then okay. You know what? Feel free to go ahead, do a setup like this where you're maybe not taking too much damage or you're taking on lots of foes. But these are the things that are going to compete with each other is the time versus health. So that's why I recommend not going with those. And then I think this one, very, very obvious. This is for the very highest of fears. If you're going to pretty much max everything out, they just want to make it as hard as humanly possible, not being able to use your Arcana cards. Be absolutely brutal. So I just kind of get this back to, yeah, something closer to this, I think is kind of what I'd be looking at. But anyway, a lot of flexibility in how you play that. Next question, between 16 and 32 fear, who do you want to go with? Froggy here, or do you want to go with the cat? Honestly, it's a bit of a coin flip. The frog's nice, being able to eat the hex from Hecate in that first region boss fight. The only reason I would actually look for Mr. Froggy a little bit more than the cat is the extra health is going to help with death defiances. So every death defiance that you trigger, you're going to end up getting a bit more health back, whereas you're just going to get the one extra death defiance from the cat. That being said, the reason why it's not that big of a deal is because of the engraved pin keepsake. You're very likely to be running this at 32 fear at least. You don't have to run this at 16. Really not necessary. I think at 16 the strategy tends to be, go ahead, pick a god that you want, and then you can shift into some safe things. You can do the pin, you can do the tooth as well. The tooth is totally fine. Or you can even go for some that are going to be a little more long lasting. So you could go like crystal figurine in, say, the second region. You could go ahead, you could get a random chaos boon in the second region. And then you might be forced to pick something a little safer by the third or the fourth in the pin or the tooth. But for 32, you want this pin on as quick as possible. If that's going to be bringing you back to 60, do you really get much out of your max life? Not a ton. But one, I think, kind of understated thing about the frog is if we go back and we look at this setup here, where we're talking between the vow of bitterness, whether this is on or off is going to change a lot about your run. If this is off, you're going for a god keepsake. That means you don't have the pin equipped. That little extra health from Freenos at the start is going to help you get through that first region, so you can then equip the pin and kind of be good from there. So it's another case where I would say lean towards the frog over the cat, but in a lot of cases, bit of a coin flip. Now, as far as the weapon aspects go, what's good, what's not? Well, really it all comes down to your skill level at the game. I think probably everything is doable, but there's definitely aspects here that are going to be easier to clear than others. 16 might be very, very hard for you to clear at the moment. 32 might be very, very hard for you to clear, or they might both feel like they're achievable, and you just kind of want whatever's going to, be fun, and you want to work towards that. So feel free to use any of the aspects, but a few that I would recommend as some of the strongest. Momus is insane. If you haven't seen it before, the special damage getting, this isn't even all the way ranked up. It'll get up to plus 30. You can just spam the special. Couple this with any kind of special damage. I know Poseidon is good. Zeus is fine. I think you could even make it work with Aphrodite if you're going really short range. Though that might be not really advisable on 32 fear. Might be a little too aggressive. Just about anyone. I even think Hera would be okay. But you just mash the special. This is a case where you don't really need magic. You're not really going to be taking advantage of the Omega special. Not really going to be using the Omega attack. So you can feel free to kind of go with that setup where you're not concerned about magic. Just go for special and you'll be good. Aspect of Malinui, I think, is, at least from what I've seen, pretty underrated. The Malinui aspects are usually not the most exciting. They're not the sexiest aspects. But this one's effect is very, very good. And you're going to want to take advantage of the Omega attack in general. Much, much better than the special. In that case, you're going to want to go for Born Gain off of Hera. Kind of go for that strategy where you switch to the pin by the second region. And then hopefully you've got your setup. There's a lot of really good hammers that lean into the Omega attack. Also worth noting, with the aspect of Malinui, the I believe it's called Vampiric Cataclysm that will heal you if you kill someone with the Omega attack. It will work even with 100% reduced healing. So yeah, very, very good aspect. You could clear this. I think it's easier in the Underworld just because doing that sort of swap to the pin in the second region of the Underworld is going to be easier, but should be doable on the surface as well. All three of these are going to be very good. I'd like to lean more into Artemis by ranking it up a bit here. I know it's very good. Aspect of Pan, this thing's crazy. It's kind of like the Chiron bow in Hades 1. You're going to be able to get these heat-seeking knives thrown out at anything that's sitting in your cast. It also has great hammers with it. The hook knives, where they come back to you, is great. Spiral knives, where now you've got 16 of them that are going to seek people out. Extremely, extremely good. You do need some magic for it. I don't think you need to go all the way to Born Gain, but still some way of managing your magic is going to be pretty important. But aspect of Malinui, once again, not so sexy. You just get some backstab damage, whatever. But this is an aspect where you, again, don't need any mana for the setup or magic, rather. I think it's very, very good. I've ran it on the surface. You can just start out with absolutely no magic. Don't plan for any magic. Go ahead, prime as much as possible, and you're just mashing the attack, basically trying to take advantage of backstab. Instead of using your Omega attack to get behind, just dash through enemies and attack them from behind. Yeah, more than enough damage, more than enough clear speed, and it's going to let you bump down some of those other modifiers. So again, if time is of a concern, I think this would be a really, really good one to go with. This is, yeah, great on the surface and not. And then I'll just mention Artemis, because we're here. You can basically do the exact same thing as Malinui, or you can take advantage of the Omega attack here. The thing is, you can actually get the parry off without magic, so you could run a no magic setup, still get the parry and riposte effects, and go ahead with that. Or, yeah, if you just want a little bit of magic, you don't need to go Born Gain, but look for something, I don't know, Fluid Gain or something like that. It's going to get you just a little bit of magic. Maybe don't start with it dropped all the way to 0. You'll be just fine there. This is going to be one of the harder aspects to go with, not going to lie. It's going to be slow. I think Eos is probably what I'd lean towards. Malinui, it's okay there. Wouldn't be my favorite aspect to go with. I do think over here, Thanatos, very, very strong. It's another one that only needs a bit of magic to work with. You're going to want to be whirlwinding, so I think don't start with 0 magic, right? If you remember what we're talking about here. Don't use the Vow of Panic. I don't think that's good, but I think you're fine to use the Vow of Arrogance to prime some. You don't need tons of max magic, but you're just going to be spinning, getting big crits, and you can actually make this work with pretty much any boons that you get, any gods. Obviously, it's great with something like Aphrodite, but it's fine if you get, you know, Apollo or even Zeus or something like that. Just a really, really solid aspect. It doesn't require a lot of setup. I think both of these others are going to be a lot more difficult. Only benefit to Malinui is that could be one where you don't rely on magic at all. And then I think over with the skulls, it's kind of between these two. I think most people, myself included, are favoring Medea at the moment. Kind of acts similar to how Beowulf works in the first game, where you can load it up, charge into stuff, cause a big explosion. And if you get used to it, you get into that rhythm, you're doing it right, you can end up doing a lot of damage very, very fast. But it does feel a little bit slow to be loading things in. I think you can hit that 5-minute mark if you get things just right, but it does still feel a little bit difficult to match the speed of some of the other aspects. It's not super picky about the gods that you want, so I think that's fine. Same sort of thing. I think you want a bit of magic just to be able to use your Omega special, to be able to pick up your skulls when you're done. But but not super necessary to get a ton of setup going with that. So lots and lots of options. I think for 32, the best ones are going to be Momus and Pan. I think those are the two absolute top tier ones. But I think these two daggers are not far behind because you can go with more favorable setups. And then I would actually say, yeah, Malinui and Thanatos would be right behind that as well, kind of in the mix with anything that's behind Pan and Momus. So I'd compare them similar to these other two daggers. And then maybe, just maybe, I'd put Medea in there. I'd need a little bit more experience with it, but I think if you're good with the weapon, that would be good as well. So all that, finally, what does the Arcana card setup look like? This is about what I like to do in a 16 Fear setup. So one of the key things you're going to notice here is getting a full row. And this gets very, very interesting. So getting this full row is going to enable divinity. So any boons are offered, get a plus 20% chance to be epic, which is sometimes good, but sometimes not good, right? If we go back and we look over here, we'll see with the Vow of Arrogance, whenever you choose a boon, you're going to prime 10 magic for each rarity greater than common, meaning epics are priming 20 magic. That can be very rough, and on some setups, it's fine. If you're going for a 0 magic setup, it's totally fine. Go ahead, prime as much as you possibly can. It's okay. But in some other setups, let's say you want to go with this exact thing here, you might want to just go ahead and disable this because you don't want to prime the additional magic. And if you're at 32 fear, you're not going to be getting life back when you move from location to location anyway. Sometimes you want this to complete the row, sometimes you don't. You know, just be aware. But there's some other contenders here, some flexibility in what I like to do. So a lot of this I think is pretty straightforward. It's a safer play style, but it's not going to allow for rerolls. So one thing to note, some people are fine just dying and dying and dying and resetting, and they'll just wait until the game gives them a good setup. Other people really like the rerolls here to make sure that they're able to just get a good setup right off the bat. Some aspects, like I said, also kind of require less setup. If you go with the daggers, you're not really looking for anything in particular, like Malinui's daggers, where you just have no magic. You're probably fine with no rerolls, but if you're going the aspect of Malinui on the staff, you almost certainly need Born Gain. So I would recommend the rerolls. And in a case like that, yeah, you're probably going to be dropping that, and then maybe something like the Huntress. Obviously, if you were up to 30 grasp here, you'd be able to be a little bit more flexible. But something like this is maybe going to be a little bit more reasonable. You can target that Born Gain right off the bat with the rerolls. Very high chance that you're going to hit it. And then you've got this disabled. Like I said, it's sort of competing with magic, and in the case that you're re-rolling, it's usually for something that's going to be using magic. So I think this setup goes quite well. Honorable mention to Origination. I think this is another one. I don't have it all the way leveled up here. It'll get to 50% at the next level. It's a ton of damage. It's very, very good. And let's say you're going for the previous setup, you know, something closer to this. I think you could drop that and grab Origination. Or you could stick with it. Maybe you're not using the Omega moves too much, like you're on that dagger setup. This is really, really great for that. You're probably just going to get really good flat damage, but you still want to keep your attack damage high. So it's another one that I would say just kind of work in depending on the aspect that you're going to be using. Definitely worth leveling up, having that kind of flexibility. But it's not going to be super necessary on every run. Sometimes you're just going to end up not getting the cursed effects, so it's kind of rough to use. There's one other setup that I'd possibly recommend. It's a little goofy, a little bit strange, but here is in Restoring Magic. So if we think about going back to those daggers or the Staff of Momus, where we're really not expecting to use our Omega moves. Well, who cares about magic at all? Prime it, just leave it, right? Leave it at 0. Don't worry about it. I think Knight is something, and you can go ahead and level this up some more. When it's ready, I believe it'll get all the way up to 4. You can at least still take advantage of your Hex effects if you go ahead into one of these no magic setups. Hexes, they're pretty hit or miss. The time slowdown up on the surface is incredible, right? It's really good against the bosses, really good against regular enemies, and it works with the engraved pin. So the engraved pin, where you've got that 10-second countdown, it's actually going to slow down the 10-second countdown. It gives you so much time to clear a boss, clear a room, go ahead and keep your death defiances, get back up to that 60 life. It is absolutely incredible in that setup. I think it's the one use case for Knight, something that I don't see people using, but it really, really, really is powerful if you do something like that. That being said, because the hexes are a little hit or miss, for example, the healing hex isn't going to heal you if your restoration's down to 0. Firing laser beams, using morph, not really going to help all that much on bosses, especially against Kronos, where he's kind of got that time dilation effect. So your wind up on the cast speed of the hex isn't actually going to slow him down. It can be very, very brutal. So there's a lot to consider. I definitely think this setup is much better on the surface than it is in the underworld, but it would be something to consider. I would probably favor something like this in the underworld, and yeah, maybe go to the Knight and really target that time slowdown on the surface. But that's just me. It's really going to be up to the person. So a lot of stuff there to consider. There is flexibility, like I said, in a lot of those setups from 16 to 32. But hopefully that gives a pretty decent breakdown. If you're thinking all these different things, I'm sure there's a million other small cases that I've missed that we could talk about. If you've got questions, you've got comments on cool setups or something like that, yeah, go ahead and ask them in the comments, or yeah, just share the setups that you've done. I would love to see what other people are running. But this is what's been mostly working for me in my runs here recently. So hope that helps with 16, 32, or some other fear levels. Good luck out there.